Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, we've been defeated by the Witness. It made the portal within the Traveler and now has escaped to God knows where. But the Witness's disciples have been pretty fair game. Thus far, we've been able to beat the brakes off of Rhulk, Nezarec, and Calus. And whilst we haven't necessarily confirmed them to be disciples with a capital D, we've also served measurable defeats to both Xivu Arath and Eramis. And then of course we killed Oryx all the way back in the day in the Taken King. So yeah, we've done a fair number to at least half a dozen of the Witness's greatest minions, but we still haven't faced all of the disciples. Today I'm going to jump into the Root of Nightmares raid lore and talk about something rather remarkable, which is the writings of an unknown disciple. It asks a question of the Witness that is as profound as they come. This disciple directly challenges the Witness to define the final shape, and whilst we get no answer from the Witness, this begins to explain a whole lot about the nature of the Witness's position on things generally, and tells us a lot about all of the disciples. But first, I wanted to let you know about the sponsor of today's video. No, it's not a VPN and it's not a male grooming product, so, I mean, what else do content creators make ads for? Raid Shadow Legends is probably known to all of you by now as a massive free-to-play mobile game with over 80 million players, where you can take on bosses with over 600 unique champions. It's Raid's 4th birthday, but unlike most other 4th birthday parties you've been to, at Raid's 4th birthday bash you can meet unique and distinguished faces, such as Man-Bear-Pig for debuffing enemies, a member of Blue Man Group, ironically enough useful for bullying a single target. 9 out of 10 dentists do not recommend, and yet 9 out of 10 healers want to be just like him. And Gold, the person TM, for when you need to make your crit numbers equally shiny. For Raid's 4th anniversary you can also get dedicated offers, free gifts, promo codes, and events, including a brand new fusion event where you can get your hands on an anniversary themed legendary champion. And for new players jumping in, there's a nice bonus for using my QR code or the link in the description, which includes XP brews, potions, energy refills, and an epic champion called Kellen the Shrike. You can also claim more free anniversary gifts by using promo code 4YearsRaid to get 4 legendary skill tomes and a bunch of other useful stuff. Use my QR code or the link in the description to claim all of the 4th anniversary gifts for free. Thanks again to Raid for sponsoring this video. Anyway, back to the lore. So where do we find this lore? Well, we find it in the Inspiral Lorebook. In particular, this is entry number 8, called The Cave. I'm going to go ahead and quickly read this in full, then we'll see what we can learn from it all. A delusion of a being long dead. An idea of living only to serve, only for one purpose. It leaves behind a sharp-edged data fragment to mark its passing. There is a conflict in me, O Witness, that unsettles your weapon, myself. Why is it that you allow flawed understandings of your great work to persist in all those who serve you, even in your disciples? Every one of us seems to have some different conception of your final shape. I do not need reassurance in my own comprehension, only to understand what purpose it serves that you have chosen such disparate servants to carry out your will. Is it a simple answer? Perhaps none who serve can have the capacity to grasp your vision, and so, rather than waste more time and attention on explaining something they will never hold, it is enough that they act as you will. The witch and her hive carving single-mindedness out of the cloth of the universe, that whispered nightmare seeking the fullest gamut of existence, the upender destroying all differentiation. Shadows on the wall. In this case, it would be hubris to think I have understood your work, that I alone among your disciples have grasped what purpose it is we serve. All of us must see darkly reflected. But there is relief in simplification. There is kindness in winnowing. So then, why is this proliferation permitted? The shadows, showing the truth by their casting. Perhaps it is enough to simply trust that we are weapons in your hand, O Witness. Even if we cannot see the perfect shape of your plan, we serve it by your wielding of us. Each disciple has come to be only by your will, and so that incomprehension is also in your making. You ask for trust and obedience and promise that whatever you do, whatever finality you achieve, will suit each of your followers perfectly. Your final shape will be 100 promises kept. I have seen the reflections of it through all of we disciples. Through the tracks you leave in the universe, a truth understood through the shadows it casts. There, I have resolved the conflict within my thoughts, and I am at peace again. Once more, I am only your violence and nothing more. The final shape will realize us as we strive. So, first of all, let's talk about the first question raised by this lore entry, which is simply, who wrote it? It's clearly the words of a disciple of the Witness, and we can tell that not only because of the reverence with which it refers to the Witness and the fact that it talks about it and other disciples, but also from that first sentence in the lore entry. The whole of the Inspiral lorebook is formatted like this. It gives us a sentence or two worth of information about who the individual is that's leaving the log, and then it shows us how they're leaving it behind. In this instance, we get the sentence, "A delusion of a being long dead, an idea of living only to serve, only for one purpose. It leaves behind a sharp-edged data fragment to mark its passing." So this doesn't sound like much at first, but remember what Rulk says in The Vow of the Disciple.
Not kings, not gods, disciples, prophets, saviors serving existence, an undying purpose, a privilege.
Saviors serving existence, an undying privilege, seems as though, to an extent, it parallels the description of a delusion of a being long dead, an idea of living to serve, only for one purpose. But the whole thing here seems to imply that there's something more going on. It seems as though there's a different perspective here in these first couple of lines at the beginning than from the passage that follows. It's almost as though the individual making those first couple of sentences is making commentary on the disciple, whose name is still unknown. A delusion of a being long dead, and an idea of living only to serve? I mean, that's self-deprecating language if it is the same person. But maybe then this is the same person and they've simply turned tail and betrayed the Witness. Who knows, but the point is still there. There's some kind of weird disagreement and disharmony within the writing. So it's entirely possible that our disciple here is a turncoat, but it's also possible that our disciple here, given the delusion of a being long dead, is just, dead, and whoever the narrator here is just basically rendering judgment upon them in the hindsight of all things. If so, perhaps they're rendering judgment upon everyone in the Inspiral lorebook, with each of their different descriptions of each of the narrators. A topic for another time, perhaps. What we can absolutely say about this disciple is that they're not any character that we know of. For starters, it would be weird for Xivu and Oryx to refer to Savathun as the Witch, and to refer to the Hive, their brethren, as her Hive. So it doesn't seem like it's either of them. The passage also makes reference to that whispered nightmare, which makes an obvious nod in the direction of Nezarec, and to the Upender, which seems to be a reference to Rulk. We know based on the timing, and even the way in which this is written, that this absolutely cannot be Callus, the latest of the Witness's disciples to rise to the station, and the most recent to fall. So at current, the identity of this disciple in question here is unknown. Given the vast stretch of time that the Witness has existed for, it's clear that there must have been many disciples, but there are no further clues as to who this disciple might have been that give us anything obvious. It's intriguing for the disciple to name itself as the Witness's weapon, as it's indicative of the kind of culture, or at least the kind of background, that they must have come from. This is clearly not an individual who values their individualism and agency, as they openly accept their title as a weapon, aka something that doesn't have its own agency. It is an extension of the witness's will and desire to dominate. It only acts at the demand of the witness, much like a sword cannot act unless it is swung in someone's hand. However, they do require a degree of assurance in the witness's plans, given that they question the nature of the final shape. That's something we'll touch on in just a second, by the way. Perhaps it's all perspective, but I feel as though these words have echoes that remind me of both someone of faith and an assassin or mercenary, or at least someone with a kind of military background. The idea that they're simply there to serve the witness's will and be its weapon implies not only a degree of martial competence, but also martial discipline, one which brings with it a fair degree of skill given the confidence of the individual to call themselves the witness's weapon. However, the disciple here seems to require faith or clarification from the witness as to what the final shape is, or at very least as to why it's something which is different according to every disciple's conception of it. At very least, they seem to philosophically muse on the idea of what the final shape is, and this implies that they're disciplined and perhaps even principled as well. A weapon, but a weapon whose purpose is reinforced by the surety of its conviction in some regard. Even as the disciple assures the witness that it understands its own interpretation of the final shape and believes it to be correct, it asks certain questions, such as whether it can truly conceive of the final shape fully. The faith in the philosophy there seems concrete until it isn't when further questions are being asked. Speaking of philosophy, let's go ahead and touch on something that a few of you, I'm sure, have been jumping up and down about in the comments section for ages. The name of this 8th entry in the Inspiral Lore book is called The Cave. Some of you may have heard of Plato, and if you poked your ears up at the idea of philosophy and of the mention of shadows, yeah, this is definitely something you're going to know about, but for the rest of you, we'll introduce this by reading one line again. The shadows showing the truth by their casting. This is a direct reference to Plato's allegory of the cave, as is the name of this lore entry. Plato's allegory of the cave is a very old philosophical notion, and it's all to do with perspective and the nature of truth, although there are lots of musings on what it could mean. For those that don't know it, here are the basics. For their entire existence, a group of prisoners are chained up in a cave. They cannot move and are forced to look at a single wall in a single direction. The wall is illuminated by a fire, and everything else in the cave is dark. The fire is behind and above them. Between their backs and the fire there is a wall, which obscures any potential peripheral view of the fire. People walk from time to time between the fire and the wall, carrying objects and symbols on standards above their heads. These objects peek above the wall, and in turn cast shadows on the wall that the prisoners are looking towards. To the prisoners, the shadows of these objects are all that exists. They can debate the nature of the reality they perceive and look for meaning within the shadows in front of them. They may come to different conclusions, but they are never able to ascertain the truth of the matter. To them, this is reality. One day, a prisoner does escape from the cave and sees the outside world for what it is, and realizes that the shadows on the wall of the cave have been nothing but an illusion of reality given life by their own perceptions. This allegory has a ton of different interpretations, lots of which are to do with the way in which we ascertain knowledge, the nature of truth itself, and even the ramifications of things such as politics. But here in this moment, I believe that this reference is being used to refer to a simple yet incredibly important fact. According to this unknown disciple, none of the disciples can agree on the true nature of the final shape. The disciples, and to an extent, probably us as well, are the prisoners, and the objects casting shadows are all simply illusions of the final shape, interpreted differently by each disciple, aka each prisoner. This explains perhaps why there is such a different set of interpretations of what the final shape truly means, and why the disciples of the witness are so very different in their goals and motivations. The final shape has never been adequately explained by any of them, or to any of them by the looks of things. The Hive and Savathun, back in the days before she turned to the light, would have had their interpretation of the final shape as being the most efficient way of living life, ensuring that there was strength and allowing only that to exist within the universe. Rulk, the Upender, upended things regardless, by the way the passage seems to be voiced and concerned with him. And then there's Nezarec and his interpretation of life, which is simply that you need to go ahead and torment it and create pain to drink and feed off of. These are three wildly different interpretations of things, and even if you are going to bundle Rulk and the Hive together with something that's a little bit similar, given that there's at least the vague compassionate stance of what we've heard about Sword Logic before, which is that you should exterminate weak life before it has a chance to suffer, you still have Nezarec alongside all that, though, and Nezarec believes that no, those things should be allowed to suffer as much as possible because pain is kind of my jam. This dissonance between all of the different perspectives of the final shape is a real problem, and it's something which totally didn't make me bank theory on the idea that Nezarec was a traitor to the Witness, but I digress. The point being raised here gives us an insight into something really important. The Witness seems to be keeping all of its servants in the dark to a degree. Every single one of them is ignorant to the truth just in the same way that we might be as well. This not only implies that our interpretation of the final shape might be wrong, and might have been wrong from the very beginning because it's based on the Hive's understandings, but it implies that even the greatest servants of the Witness don't know what it is. If that's true, then we still have a lot to discover. We might never know their name, but this unnamed disciple might have upended everything that we know about the supposed goals of the Witness, where it's gone, and what it's doing, and what it wants. These things have never been more mysterious to us than in this moment, but amongst that uncertainty, there is a little bit of hope. If the disciples don't know the truth of the final shape and what it really is, if there is disagreement and discontent amongst their remaining number, then maybe we can do something to peel away a few of them and weaken the Witness's armies. This revelation is important, not only because it tells us how little we know, but because it tells us how little our enemy knows. But that's all from me for now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, go ahead and leave a like. If you want more Destiny lore content, go ahead and hit subscribe, and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. And of course, if you have thoughts of your own, leave them down below in the comments section. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Rhodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.